What is up, guys? It is the Bluebloods here coming back at y'all with another episode in our Pac-12 in 31 days. We are joined by Oregon football insider and writer for The Athletic for the Oregon Ducks. Tyson Alger is here with us today, and I just want to say I appreciate you joining me.
Hey, of course, Zach. It's May's a pretty good time to be a college sports writer because I got time to do these sort of things.
Hey, it's all. I mean, outside of recruiting, that's about the only thing that never stops. So you got a lot to do on that front. But I want to shift backwards, man. Last fall, August 11th, the Pac-12 commissioner Larry Scott made the decision to postpone the Pac-12 season. It was retroactively, pulled back, and we had a very, very condensed season to say the least. It was praised by some. It was condemned by others, especially once the SEC and some of these other conferences started playing football. What was your initial reaction to the decision to postpone the season? And did Oregon have any alternative plans if the Pac-12 doesn't go back and change what it was going to do?
It's that was such a wild time because one, there was just like this feeling of like they needed to figure something out because you did see for like across the rest of the country, SEC and all these other conferences like getting their stuff together. And then meanwhile, you had a conference in the Pac-12 that like revised its schedule, canceled its schedule, and then decided to bring things back. And so like very specifically, like my thoughts for it was like, well, this is going to basically screw Oregon for this year because like the Ducks had a roster where if a couple things went right for them, they had a chance to. They won the Pac-12 title last year, even after having four very important opt-outs. And I thought they had an outside chance of putting something together last year that would have at least been more nationally relevant than what they ended up doing. And so I think it was a lot of that. And especially, I covered Penei Sewell for, his 3 years in Eugene. And I was kind of pretty tuned into like that time of the year with them. And just like for those guys that were potential first round picks, they just had like zero guidance from the league and from like everything in terms of like, why should I stay? You guys aren't announcing anything. And it was just a chaotic time in overall chaotic time for the conference too. Like, especially with, Larry Scott's impending departure and everything. It was a mess, and I'm babbling about it because it was just, yeah.
Hey, I mean, you did a better job covering it there than they did managing it. I mean, I think on the podcast here, I mentioned that they tried to be more first than right in terms of how they handled the situation. They wanted to be the first one to kind of take that like progressive step to cancel the season. And listen, I picked Oregon to make the playoffs in my preseason predictions before all this COVID cancellation happened. So I was super high on the Ducks, but in the 2020 season, you mentioned they win the Pac-12 championship. They take Washington's place, who was left out of the title game due to COVID issues. As a big rival for Washington, that had to be a huge slap in the face for them that their rival got to take their place and win the title. But for you, did this season meet, exceed, or fall short of your preseason expectations?
Well, it's funny just going back to that because that was just a bizarre 2 weeks because for 1 week, all the Oregon fans were just incredibly angry at Washington because so Oregon was supposed to host Washington at Autzen, and the winner of that was going to win the North Division. But because Washington couldn't play in that, they ended up winning by default. And so Oregon fans thought Washington was ducking them. And then Washington can't go play in the title game, and then the Ducks are able to slip in. And it was the perfect Pac-12 season that like a second place team in the North Division ends up then wiping out undefeated USC in the South. So like, I guess when you get down to they won a conference title, they made it to a New Year's Six game. I guess like in that realm, they probably were like right on target, especially considering the opt-outs, but they lost 3 of their final 4 games to end of the year. They were really consistent on offense. And I just thought the biggest factor in what the pandemic did to a team like Oregon last year is in 2019, their defense was so in sync. There was no missed tackles. They were a ball hawking secondary, and they just seemed like they were off a step like throughout the whole year last year. And there was just not enough time in a 6 or 7 game schedule to really kind of tinker with those sort of things without it just essentially taking up your whole year. So I think they underperformed in the sense of how well they actually played week by week. But I mean, they're not going to apologize for winning a conference title at the same time.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at the opt-outs just on like I know Penei Sewell, arguably probably maybe the best player in college football last year going into the year, opts out. But I look more in that secondary, man. Javon Holland, listen, on this podcast, people could tell you Javon Holland was my guy. I was like, this kid might be the best secondary player right there with Derek Stingley in the country. And the Pac-12 right now is not really known for dominating just stifling defenses. But this Oregon defense coming into, let's just say this year, might be one of the most talented units in the country. You look at someone like Kayvon Thibodeau, who's a projected maybe #1 pick in this next year's NFL draft. You have the 2 5-star linebackers. You have talent literally everywhere. What has been the key to the defensive rebuild in Eugene, and what do you expect from this defense this coming year?
Man, it's crazy because I started covering Oregon back when it was still like the fast pace, like flash offense, like score at will sort of thing. And for it within a matter of about 5-6 years to transition to a school where like the fans are getting excited about the defensive side of the ball. And I've never been around Oregon when that's been the case. And so they've really shifted their recruiting towards like lengthy, explosive athletes, especially on the edge. I mean, like you see like Thibodeau, but I mean, like we saw Justin Flo in the spring game a couple weeks ago, and this is after he missed all of last season with an injury, and he's technically like pretty low down on the depth chart, but I don't see how he doesn't start at some point this year. When you see a 5-star on a field like that caliber of 5-star up close, it's a different type of athlete. So they really, I mean, essentially since Cristobal came in, they just decided that like there's no athlete that we're not gonna like that we're gonna disqualify ourselves from, and that was kind of Oregon's MO before, is they always tried to go after guys that they thought might be interested in coming into Eugene. And the big transformation under Cristobal has been like, why wouldn't they want to come here? We're going to go get those guys, and especially like his first 3 recruiting classes were just like loaded on the defensive line, loaded at linebacker, and they've just been piling up in the secondary too. I mean, like Holland was a stud. Verone McKinley, their free safety right now, like he's a stud. Dante Manning, they have another 5-star back there who's going to be like probably the number 3 cornerback this year. Like they're just like accumulating depth at the secondary. I mean, at the second level of the depth chart that they just didn't have before, because Oregon's had good defensive players in the past. Like DeForest Buckner was a first-round pick. Eric Armstead was a first-round pick. They just didn't have that second unit. They just didn't have that depth. And Oregon's just basically like stacking guys on guys on guys now. And it's really paying off. And that's even on top of the fact that they're on their 3rd defensive coordinator in the last 4 seasons. And they did take a little bit of a step back last year, but I attribute that more to kind of the pandemic conditions and just not being able to practice at full tilt than anything else.
Right. And I mean, I want to go to the offensive side of the ball now, because this is an area that, I mean, I never thought I'd see this. A quarterback goes and wins the Pac-12 championship and then transfers after the season. And Tyler Shaw, he's off to Texas Tech. But for me, it's weird because Oregon seems like they have better odds to get a better guy in that starting role this year. I really am in love with Ty Thompson and what he could bring, especially in the future at Oregon. But it looks like Anthony Brown is the presumptive favorite to take that QB1 role. What do each of these guys bring to the table, and who is your predicted starter for the 2021 season?
Yeah, it's 99% chance it's going to be Brown. He's just so much more polished than anybody. There's not another quarterback on the roster that's taken a collegiate snap. And what we've seen of Brown has been in very small sample size. We saw him play in situational parts of 2 games last year, coming on off the bench behind Chuck. And then we saw him at 2 practices this spring. And I mean, like he looks the part of a veteran. He makes decisions quickly. He's relatively accurate with the ball. He doesn't really look like he gets all that rattled, but I mean, he looks like a good quarterback. I don't know if he's great, and I don't know if he has that ceiling. That's kind of the big question right now, is Oregon's assuming it has a guy that's going to be able to get its skill position players the ball. They just don't know if this is also the type of guy that's going to be able to like go over the top and win them a game. So we'll see what happens there. But there's just such an ocean of experience between him and like a Ty Thompson or a Robbie Ashford or Jay Butterfield, who, I mean, it's 3 4-star quarterbacks with like 4 years of eligibility behind them. Like, it's an awfully talented group of freshmen in there, and Thompson's obviously the star. He's the highest rated Oregon quarterback recruit of all time. I writing about him leading into signing day, like every high school defensive coordinator in Arizona is like thanking God that he's graduated and gone. And he looks really good. Like in the spring game, he was inaccurate at times, but like, he's a freshman. It was his first time playing in the stadium, and just his physical skills mixed with just like he can run, but he's always keeping his eyes downfield. He's always trying to like run that receiver open to kind of get him the ball. He's going to be really, really good at Oregon, and maybe if things don't go like, if Oregon loses a couple games out of the gate, like I could totally see them going to Thompson at some point. But I think just especially with Ohio State in week 2, they're probably going to go on the guy that has, I think, 28 career starts right now, and that's Anthony Brown.
Absolutely. And I like what Brown brings, but I think Thompson's going to be a star, man. I'm not going to lie. I think he'll be, I mean, he's good. It's a big say, but I think he has the potential to challenge Mariota's legacy at the quarterback position in Eugene. I mean, he's that good. But you mentioned one of the key changes a question or two ago is Mario Cristobal, and the hire of him from Alabama, been the head guy since 2017, 25-10 over his first 4 years, with 2 Pac-12 titles back-to-back these past 2 seasons. What makes him such a successful head coach for Oregon? And do you think he's the guy to bring Oregon that elusive national championship?
It's hard to predict a national championship, but he's going to have them in the conversation. I think under Cristobal, their floor is kind of Pac-12 title contention, and I think that they're bringing in the type of talent where every like maybe 3 or 4 years they might have that window to potentially peak with the playoff and go from there. But it's just been, it's just I alluded to it before, but like Oregon before just had kind of like this. It's like our type of players. We're going to go get like our type of guys, and it worked. Like Oregon had an unreal run for like 8 years of like taking like 3-star guys and like turning them into like potential like Heisman candidates. Like just it was like video game offense, and it worked for them. But like that's just an unreal run of luck to be able to do that. And so it's just the amount of talent acquisition that they've been able to do since Cristobal's got here, and then that mixed in with. There's just been a lot more emphasis on like the strength training program. Like Oregon's guys are so much bigger than they were 5-6 years ago. And especially on the offensive line, where like an average guy is like 325. Like it's like walking around those guys, it just seems like a different type of build than it did, even on like Oregon's like 2014 Rose Bowl college football playoff team. It's just a emphasis on size and emphasis on like physical football. Because, I mean, in truth, like a lot of teams caught up with the Ducks in terms of what they were doing with like the spread and speed and everything. And I think this was, you don't always necessarily go in the complete opposite direction. And Oregon still got a pretty good offense with Joe Moorhead as offensive coordinator. But it's just turning this into like a physical football team has been like the real big change for him, because, I mean, that's the type of football he saw down in the SEC.
Absolutely. I mean, he took that blueprint that he worked under for years and brought it up to the Pac-12, man. But you mentioned the spring game. You were kind of mentioning the QB battle, and of course, that was something to watch. It was back in the first of the month, 35-34 win for the offense. I love the scoring format that they used for this game, by the way, too. I thought it was one of the more unique ones.
Could you explain it to me? I'm still trying to figure it out.
I mean, so from what I was reading, what I was watching is like the defense could score points by getting stops.
It was like a third down stop was like I forget exactly what it
was. Yeah, they had a whole breakdown. Like I was reading about it, like after watching, I was like, man, that's a way different take than a lot of schools. But 35-34 win for the offense. Robbie Ashford walk-off score to win that one. But other than the quarterback battle, what were some storylines that you were paying a lot of attention to, and what were your overall takeaways from spring practice as a whole?
Looking at that linebacker group is interesting, because they do have Kayvon Thibodeau playing in a little bit more of a hybrid role this year. Like he's never been like your straight up conventional defensive end anyways. Like they've had him drop back like over the last couple of years. Like he's not always like a hand in the ground sort of guy, but they're kind of going to have him in an outside linebacker hybrid, like Von Miller-esque, like Texas Tech role. And I mean, I never needed to see anything from Thibodeau in a spring game, but it's just fun to watch him, especially after we missed out on like a year of having Sewell around. Like you just kind of appreciate those like elite level players while they're there. But the thing that I wanted to watch the most, just because of like the just sheer amount of talent they have, is Oregon's receiving room is just stacked this year. Like they brought back every senior that had the ability to come back. They added this spring, they had in 2 early enrollees who were both like top, I think, 60 players from the 2021 class that looked like they could contribute right away. And then like every other like grade level has like 3 or 4 like guys that can contribute through there. So it's just like top to bottom. It's just, and this is a team that like in Justin Herbert's 2017 season had 1 receiver that he threw to. Like it was just like so thin then, and to go from there into what they have now, where it's Micah Pittman has been injured the last 2 years, and I think that he could be a stud. He's Michael Pittman Jr. is a younger brother, the receiver for the Colts. Devin Williams they have like 2 guys that have like 6'6" frames, which is just like type of bodies that the Ducks haven't brought in before. Like I think that's part of why Brown is such an attractive quarterback for them, is like they know that Brown can get the ball at least to like these type of talents and let them go out and do their things. And I'm really excited to see what they are able to draw up with not only just the talent of those receivers, but just like the discrepancy in like body types and sizes. Like they have like 3 or 4 just like, slot swing guys that like I think Joe Moorhead probably stays up till like 4 a.m. envisioning like how to get them open on like some sort of swing or screen and stuff. So it'll be fun to watch the receiving core.
Absolutely, yeah. That room is loaded. We did like a spring game recap for Oregon. That was one of my big takeaways. Is like, man, there's a perception, like even when Herbert was playing, there seemed to be like this weird perception outside of Eugene in the Pac-12 area that he didn't have any star receivers. And I'm like, there's a lot of talent up there at Oregon at the wide receiver position that just doesn't get recognized. And I think this is the year a lot of them are going to break out. But I want to get to the recruiting show. You mentioned it earlier. The 2021 class wrapped up back in February, a top 6 class according to the 247 composite for Oregon. This is just a ridiculous stat for people. 13 top 200 prospects were signed in this recruiting class. It just shows you just the ridiculous amount of talent they got. What were the biggest positional needs for Oregon this recruiting cycle, and who are some instant impact freshmen that we could see maybe see the field this year?
So coming into the 2020 season, Oregon lost its entire offensive line. And so that was a really big key for them. And when Oregon goes out to recruit the offensive line, like they do it with a purpose. Like that's I think there's probably no position coach on Oregon's roster that has more pressure on them than Alex Mirabal, just because the line is Mario Cristobal's baby. And they went out and got 4 just really good guys, including Kingsley. Oh, I'm going to butcher his last name. Kingsley, yes. He's a Sewell family protege. He's from Utah. I think he was like the number 36 player in this class, and he's a player that like has been compared a lot to Sewell in just terms of like how physical he can be. They're a little bit different body type. Kingsley's like 300. Sewell was like 340 when he came in. But they just got a really big new like class of linemen that are athletic. They kind of fit. Oregon likes to get its linemen out in space and be able to kind of like, just really kind of take advantage of some of the speed that those guys have. So yeah, that was big for them. And they signed a really, really good tight ends class this year, which is another big part of Moorhead's offense. Like the Ducks had just a weird tight end situation last year. Cam McCormick, who is just a really great kid, but he's been injured for basically the last 3 full seasons, and they just haven't had. So they brought a defensive end over last year, DJ Johnson, and he had like 3 touchdowns in like the first 2 weeks, and then they never heard from him again. So they like last year, like they got production out of tight end, but it was never like your stereotypical, this is what I want out of a tight end. And they signed 2 guys, Maliki Matavao and Terrence Ferguson, who just look like studs. Like they're both like 6'6", like 240, 250. They can move well. They're going to get playing time right away. And so I think that's going to be a really big key, because the Ducks just haven't really gotten consistent play out of that position on offense in probably like two and a half seasons or so, ever since Jacob Breland got hurt. I think in 2018, 2019.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I love this class. I mean, there's so much talent. I mean, and Oregon's going to be set up for years down the line. Like, I mean, if you feel like that this streak is going to end, Oregon's going to be at the top of the Pac-12 for years to come. But when I look at the schedule, man, looking ahead to 2021, it's not going to be an easy road to repeat as Pac-12 champions. I mean, a week 2 visit to Ohio State is brutal. I hate that we missed Ohio State traveling out to Autzen, playing the Ducks at home.
2033 or whatever they announced.
Yeah. Oh man, that's just so far down the line. That game I was so excited for. But yeah, all the way to Columbus week 2, and then you still have to play tough teams like UCLA, Washington, Utah, all on the road, all difficult environments, difficult teams to play. For you right now, though, looking at the schedule, looking at all the talent, all the freshmen, everything, what is the ceiling and or floor for this 2021 team?
Boy, that's so tough to say, because I legitimately have no idea how they're going to do against Ohio State. Like I think that the Ducks can take advantage of a not so great Buckeye secondary and maybe score some points and hang. And if that's the case, maybe they're a pick six or a turnover score away from being in that thing. So I think that's going to be the big barometer, because they're talented enough to run the table in the Pac. Like I really think they can. I do think that that's going to be tough with just some of the overall inexperience they have. Like this is an incredibly talented roster, like the good players, but I do think that proven production is a very underrated thing these days, and where people think it's just plug in and play with recruits. So I want to see what they're able to do over a 12-game schedule, because it's like looking on paper, they look great, but then I also very much remember they lost 3 of the last 4 games to end the year last year. So it's just how much of last year actually counts in the long run, or like if it was an aberration, or whether that's indicative of how they're going to play, because they definitely have to tackle better. They have to be more advantageous in the secondary. They went from, I think, 20 interceptions in 2019 that they had 5 last year. Granted, it was a shorter season, but it was just, that was such a big momentum play that they would always use in 2019. So if it goes well, it means Brown's playing well from the start. It means they get a little bit better play out of their offensive line, which had 5 completely new starters last year. And it means like players like Noah Sewell and Justin Flo and some of those guys in the secondary like have really good years. If Brown struggles, or if somebody gets hurt, like I am a little bit concerned about some of the depth in the secondary. Their ones are really good. They could be an injury or 2 away from just getting picked apart. I think the floor is probably like a 4-loss season. So like probably somewhere in that in between. Like I could see them going, I think like 10-2, 11-1 is a realistic year for them this year, considering their talent. But it's the Pac-12, man. Every time you think you have a front runner, every time you think you have a team that's like ready to like take that step, they lose 3 of their first 4 games, and we're just back in the slop.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I want to get to next. I mean, but one of my last questions here is just about the perception of the Pac-12 in general. I feel like with 4 seats at the table, the new Pac-12 commissioner was mentioning it too, that the Pac-12's got to focus on football. And as Oregon, when you're at the top of the conference, Oregon, Washington, USC, those are the teams that should be concerned about this the most, because with only 4 seats at the table, it seems like the Pac-12 is always that odd man out. For you, what does the Pac-12 have to do to fix this perception that they're a step behind the rest of the Power 5 conferences in terms of competing for a national championship?
It just needs to, to be honest, it's, since I've covered the conference, there's always so much peripheral talk of like, this is how we're going to do it, or like, this is how we're innovating, or like this or that. And it's just do it. It's been since 2016 since the Pac's been in the playoff, and that's when Washington just got thumped by Alabama in the semis. And the Ducks put up had an awfully good run in 2014, and they made it to the title game. But I think there's got to be a more investment in recruiting across the campus. I mean, across the conference, like just the discrepancy and what teams are able to pull in on, the East Coast of the country and in the South versus, not every team in the Pac-12 is approaching recruiting like the Ducks or USC are right now. USC and UCLA are the only two teams in the entire conference that have top tier talent in their backyard, and they're not even good at hanging on to it. I mean, like, you have Clemson's, DJU is from, USC and Oregon were finalists for that, and they lose it to Clemson. They need to keep that talent on the West Coast, and they just need to start winning these games. I do think getting a strong USC back is a pretty important thing for this conference. Like, as I think Oregon's a national enough brand, and Washington's got money, and Washington's from Seattle, but like it's USC's like the most known commodity in this conference outside of Oregon. And I think that you need to have, I think the best thing that could happen would be if Oregon and USC start going back and forth with each other the next couple of years to just kind of generate that and occasionally have one of them reach playoff contention.
Right. And I mean, yeah, because I mean, you saw like Utah was getting no respect when they were a potential top 5 team, and then Oregon knocks them off
and then Oregon beats them by like 35 or whatever it was that game. Like it, and like I was like, this is how confusing the Pac-12 though is too, because it wasn't just like the national media was going on. Oh, Utah's getting no respect. Like I think I predicted Utah to beat Oregon like 3 scores in that game, and then like I look like an idiot. It's just tough and it's inconsistent, and I think the overall level of football I think is better than people give it credit for. Like I think the mid-range is pretty good, but that mid-range is still is good enough that it occasionally knocks off the top guys, and there's just never been that like elite team for the last 4 or 5 seasons that can get through that.
Right. I mean, I think Oregon, if they don't lose to Arizona State that 2 years ago, I think they could have. They probably would have had a really good shot to make.
Were they like number 7-ish when that happened?
I think they were 6 or 7, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. That was the most unexpected game I've ever been to. Like Oregon was like on a roll, and then they just lay a complete, and like that Arizona State team's good. Like JT, is it JT Dan?
It's Jaden Daniels.
Yeah. Sorry, Jaden Daniels. Like that kid's a good quarterback, and I think he's him and Arizona State could be a dark horse to upset some teams this year. But everyone was finally starting to talk about the playoff. The Ducks had just beat USC pretty handedly in the Coliseum. And I think Cristobal finally had a quote of like, "Oh, we deserve to be in the conversation." And then it's just a dud.
Hey, it happens. I just think the parity of the Pac-12 gets overlooked. I think Utah doesn't get enough credit. I don't think you mentioned Arizona State doesn't get UCLA towards the end of last year was one or 2 plays away from beating USC. So I just feel like those middle tier teams don't get enough credit. Colorado was a pretty good team last year as well. So
it's frustrating at times too, because like if you weren't necessarily putting it on like the national pedestal of grading all success by like whether or not you made the championship or whatnot, like covering the Pac-12 is a gas, man. Like these games are fun. Like it's, again, like you don't know what's expected, and like there's good football games that are being played. So like I've never been down on like the product of Pac-12 football, but I mean ultimately like if you're not winning, you're not making money, you're falling behind, and I mean that's kind of where we're at. It's like I think there's a lot of people that care about what's going on out here. It's just you got to start producing.
No, absolutely, man. But last question here. So we were talking before the show about how I always consider myself an honorary Oregon fan outside of one night in January and one night in August 2 years ago. But Eugene, Autzen Stadium, I mean, let's just be honest, probably one of the most famous stadiums in the country just in terms of crowd support, crowd noise. What makes this city in Eugene and Autzen Stadium so unique on game days?
Man, that's a good question. I mean, it's such a unique stadium too. It's just kind of like Eugene's like it's just surrounded by trees. Like it's a relatively quiet city, like during like the week and everything. And then it's just kind of like, and this is a little bit cliche, but there's just like a pilgrimage to the stadium. And there's so much like there's this river that you cross over the bridge and everyone's like walking up, and we have such bad weather here for so much of the year that like those fall Saturday mornings are just like like it's a great tailgate scene. It's a good stadium. It's a smart crowd. It's a crowd that cares about its players. It's a crowd that like appreciates good football too. So it's like they don't get overtly nasty towards like the opposing fan base. There's a lot of like, give and take and that sort of thing. But it's just, this is a school that supported its team for decades when they were bad, and they were bad up until about 1994 or so, and since then they've been one of the more successful programs on the West Coast, if not necessarily that top tier in the country, but close to it. And so like you had that built in, like we love our program, and then now you've had the success on top of that, and that's just kind of throw in Nike and all that kind of sort of, and just the most ridiculous facilities that they've built over the last decade. It really kind of creates a melting pot of fandom here.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to go. I'm from Southern Alabama, so I haven't had a chance to go, but it's probably like my top 2 or 3 stadium on my bucket list to go and see it. So, I got to just I have to ask you this right before I let you go, because I didn't know this was still a debate until Auburn and Oregon played in 2019.
Dyer was down.
Yeah, Dyer was down. I had to ask you, was Dyer down?
Man, before they played that game 2 years ago, I did like a full like retrospect. I went and asked like a whole bunch of old like Oregon players, like basically like put them through PTSD of their react. Like I got the camera operator who was like, he's like, I swear I saw through my lens, like Dyer was down. And so I had to be careful writing that one around like with my tone with the Oregon fans, because that's the one of the things that they're incredibly passionate about is the fact that Michael Dyer was down.
Hey, I love it. I love the debate. I didn't know it was even a thing anymore. And then right before we played, like I saw like this big Twitter thing started by a bunch of the Auburn and Oregon accounts, and they were like, Dyer was down there posting pictures and videos, and I was like, man, I didn't even know this was a debate. So
Right.
I think until the end of time, it will be a passionate debate between Auburn and Oregon fans whether Dyer was down. But it was a great game, regardless. Both Oregon, Auburn, I mentioned, need to just do a home and home series, because every time they get together, it is a historically great game.
Well, shoot, if Justin Herbert's Hail Mary at the end of that game would have landed in the same area code, maybe that Arizona State game wouldn't have mattered like months down there.
Oh, but he threw that ball, and like on that kickoff return, the kid hit like the 50, and I was sitting there, I was like, how did we just not cover the kick? Like we just did this amazing drive, and then you just don't cover the kick, and you give arguably the best quarterback in the country a perfect shot at a Hail Mary. I was upset in the crowd for that one, but
yeah, I was on the sideline for that, and now just talking about it, I'm so excited to be back to like normal football, man. Like just like no fans in the stands last year at Pac-12 games, and just I love that we had football, but it was a bit of a drag, and I'm stoked.
Yeah, you could tell it wasn't the same. And then like I think it was like Cal and Washington had to play at like 8 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast on a Sunday because of COVID, and then there was no fans in the stands. It was like, man, that game had to be the worst game of all time to play. But man, I appreciate you coming on. I had an absolute blast talking Oregon football with you. But I think you're our 3rd or 4th straight person from The Athletic that we've had on here just by chance. But I keep telling all our listeners, The Athletic is one of the best websites out there with the best college football coverage. Where can they find you on there, and where else could they find you out there in the social media world?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. It's just at Tyson Alger, one word. And then on The Athletic, if you just go to The Athletic and click on the Oregon tab, that's where I live most of the year. And I recently, I think last week, I had a longer piece making the case for Kayvon Thibodeau's Heisman campaign. If people want to check it, just kind of a little tongue in cheek looking at what are the chances of a defensive end actually contending for that thing. So yeah, if people want to check it out, great.
Hey guys, I beg y'all to go check it out. I promise you, y'all won't be disappointed. I subscribe to The Athletic. I think the best online content in the country going on right now for college football. But guys, for you know where you can find us. We kick this back off later this week with Stanford with our Pac-12 in 31 days. But This will be up, the 2-minute drill, Monday through Friday, up on our YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe now to enter yourself in the merch giveaway. But for Tyson, for myself, and for the Blue Bloods, we are out.